Single rancher found two Apache sisters freezing in the snow. Now they both want to be his wives. The morning was colder than usual on John Miller's ranch. The wind howled across the open plains, carrying snowflakes that sparkled like tiny diamonds under the pale winter sun. John had lived on this ranch for many years, and he knew every hill, every fence, and every path his cattle might wander. The land was his life, and the quiet solitude suited him. Most days he woke with the sun, fed the cattle, checked the fences, and spent the rest of the day repairing what needed repair. Life was simple, steady, and predictable. He liked it that way. On this particular morning, the cold felt sharper, and the snow had piled higher than usual. John wrapped his worn wool scarf tightly around his neck and pulled his coat closer. He had planned to inspect the northern pasture, a stretch of land that was farther from the cabin than usual. The snow made the trek more difficult, but he needed to make sure the cattle were safe. He trudged carefully, his boots crunching in the fresh snow, listening to the wind whip through the bare trees. The world felt almost empty, but there was a strange beauty in the quiet. As he moved along the familiar path, he noticed something unusual in the distance. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a stray dog or a fox. But as he came closer, his eyes widened. There were two figures lying in the snow, almost hidden by the drifts. He squinted and realized they were not animals, they were people. A man's heart can never ignore such a sight. John's mind raced. Who could be out here in the freezing cold, in the middle of nowhere, when the storm had just passed? Without a second thought, he started running toward them, the snow making each step heavy and slow, but he didn't care. Every second counted. When he reached them, he saw that they were two young girls, barely teenagers, wrapped in torn blankets that offered little protection against the cold. Their skin was pale, almost gray, and their lips were blue. They shivered violently, huddled together for warmth. John's heart ached. He knelt beside them, calling softly, "Hey, hey, can you hear me? You're going to be okay, don't worry." One of the girls stirred slightly, her eyes opening just a little. They were dark, wide, and filled with fear. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak, shivering whisper. John knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't carry them both at once easily, but leaving them there was impossible. He quickly unwrapped his own thick coat and carefully draped it around them, pulling them close. "It's all right, you're safe now," he murmured. He lifted the older girl first, supporting her carefully against his chest. She was light, but every muscle in his body protested against the cold and exhaustion. Then he helped the younger one, who clung to her sister like a small shadow. Their trust was immediate, even though they didn't speak the same language. Somehow, they knew he was their lifeline. The walk back to the cabin was long and grueling. The wind bit at his face, and snowflakes filled his eyes, making him squint and tear up. He stumbled occasionally, the girl's weight adding to the strain, but he refused to stop. Every step he took was fueled by the thought of warmth, blankets, and hot food. He imagined them in a safe room, laughing again, recovering from the terrible cold that had nearly taken them. His mind didn't allow the thought of failure. He kept repeating, almost there, like a mantra. Finally, John reached the cabin. He placed the girls gently on the couch near the fireplace, which crackled warmly, sending golden light into the room. The warmth of the fire began to chase the chill from their bodies, and the girls, shivering, slowed. John grabbed a thick blanket and wrapped it around both of them. He went to the kitchen and filled a kettle with water, setting it on the stove to boil. Soon, he had 2 mugs of hot tea, sweetened slightly with honey. He brought them back to the girls, placing the mugs carefully in front of them. The older sister took a small sip, her hands shaking as she held the warm cup. The younger one watched, hesitating at first, then copied her sister's action. While they drank, John studied their faces. Their dark hair was tangled with snow, and their clothes were torn and wet. But their eyes told him more than words ever could. They were survivors. They had endured something terrible to end up here, alone and freezing in the snow. John's heart went out to them. He had faced harsh winters before, but he had never seen such helplessness. "You're safe now," he whispered again. "I won't let anything happen to you." The girls did not respond with words, but one reached out and took John's hand for a moment. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. They trusted him even without understanding his language. John smiled gently and patted their hands. He didn't know their names yet, or where they came from, or how they had gotten lost in the snow. All of that would come later. For now, the priority was their safety and warmth. As the morning turned into afternoon, the girls began to recover slightly. Their shivering stopped, replaced by slow, exhausted breathing. John helped them change into dry clothes he had kept for emergencies. The girls looked at the warm room, the fire, and the simple furnishings with cautious curiosity. Everything was new to them, but there was no fear. They had been through something far worse, and now they were safe. John began preparing simple food, porridge, and bread, and encouraged them to eat. At first, they were hesitant, but hunger overcame hesitation. By the time they finished, color had returned to their cheeks and their eyes were brighter. After the meal, John sat with them by the fire. He tried to ask questions, pointing to himself, then to them, then to the outside world. They responded in broken words, gestures, and nods. He learned they were sisters, traveling together, separated from their family. He didn't press too hard. He knew trauma needed patience. Instead, he focused on helping them feel comfortable and safe. By evening, they were laughing quietly at something he did while stirring the fire, and he felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't known in years. That night, John prepared extra blankets and set up a small area near the fire for them to sleep. He made sure they were tucked in comfortably, and he watched over them until their breathing slowed into steady sleep. He could hear the wind outside, harsh and relentless, but inside there was peace. For John, it was the first time in many years that his home had felt truly alive. For the sisters, it was the first real warmth and safety they had experienced in a long, frightening journey. By the time the fire burned low, John sat quietly in his chair, reflecting on the day. He had gone out to check cattle and found something he had never expected, two lost, frightened lives in need of help. He realized that from this day forward his life would change. Not just because he had rescued them, but because they had already begun to touch something deep inside him, his capacity for care, compassion, and connection. For the first time in years, he felt hope and purpose beyond the daily work of the ranch. The snow continued to fall lightly outside, but inside the cabin there was warmth, safety, and a growing bond that none of them fully understood yet. The first day of this unexpected story had ended, but it had set in motion events that would change all their lives forever. John looked at the sleeping sisters and whispered softly, almost to himself, "You're safe now. I'll take care of you." It was a promise he intended to keep, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The morning after the rescue was quiet but filled with a gentle energy in John's cabin. The wind outside still howled over the plains, but inside there was warmth, both from the fire and from the small sense of security that the two sisters now felt. They had slept more soundly than they had in days, and the color in their cheeks had returned. John, as he sipped his morning coffee, looked over at them and felt a strange mixture of relief and curiosity. They were sitting near the fire, wrapped in blankets, their dark eyes studying their new surroundings carefully. Every little movement they made showed a mixture of caution and wonder. John realized that helping them was only the beginning. These were not just two children in need. They were sisters who had experienced hardship and fear, and their journey had been long and dangerous. He had rescued them from the snow, but now he needed to help them regain strength, trust, and a sense of normalcy. First, he prepared a simple breakfast, eggs, bread, and hot milk. The smell of cooking filled the cabin, and the girls watched him closely. They were hesitant to eat at first, unsure of this new routine. But John spoke softly, gesturing, smiling, and using small words. "Eat food, warm, strong," he said, pointing to the eggs and bread. Slowly they began to eat, and as they did, a small warmth of comfort grew between them. After breakfast, John helped the girls clean up. Their hair was tangled from the snow and cold, and their clothes, though dry now, were still worn and threadbare. He gave them fresh, clean garments he kept for emergencies, and as they dressed, he watched them carefully. The older sister moved with careful precision, her hands steady despite the long journey and the harsh weather they had endured. The younger sister was more restless, her eyes bright with curiosity and unease at the same time. John found himself smiling at the way she explored every corner of the cabin with small, careful steps, touching objects with curiosity, but without breaking anything. Communication between them was slow but growing. John spoke in simple words, pointing to objects, actions, and feelings. They responded with gestures, pointing to themselves, to him, or to the things they wanted to understand. The older sister's face often showed careful thought, as if she was trying to memorize every detail. The younger sister was quicker to smile and respond, laughing quietly at John's clumsy attempts to explain things or his occasional jokes. It was a small but significant sign. The ice between them was slowly breaking. John also learned small details about their journey. Using sketches and broken words, the sisters told him that their family had been forced to leave their home because of problems in their community. They had been traveling to reach distant relatives but became separated along the way. They had endured freezing nights, hunger, and fear. John listened carefully, not interrupting. He realized that the courage and resilience these sisters had shown were extraordinary, especially given their young age. He felt a growing admiration for them, not just as the children he had rescued, but as strong, determined individuals. The day passed with chores and learning. John showed them how to help feed the animals, sweep the cabin, and gather firewood. The older sister quickly picked up the routine, careful and precise, while the younger one was playful, sometimes dropping tools or laughing at her own mistakes. John laughed along with her, though his hands were busy with the chores. There was something comforting about the rhythm of the day, the simple tasks that filled the time, and the shared efforts that began to build trust and connection. By late afternoon, John realized that the girls were becoming more comfortable in the cabin. They moved freely, smiled more often, and even started mimicking some of his habits, like the way he rolled up his sleeves when working or hummed while sweeping. John felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in many years. He had lived alone for so long, focused entirely on the land and animals, and now with the sisters there was a new rhythm, a human connection, a sense of family he had never known. As evening approached, John prepared a simple meal of stew and bread. The aroma filled the cabin, drawing the girls near the fire to watch him cook. They asked questions in gestures, pointing to the pot, pointing to their stomachs, and making small sounds. John smiled, realizing they were learning quickly and that their curiosity was growing. When the food was ready, he placed bowls in front of them. This time they ate with more confidence, their eyes occasionally meeting his with gratitude and trust. For John, these small moments meant the world. Each bite they took, each smile they shared, was a sign that they were healing not just physically but emotionally. After the meal, they all sat together near the fire. John pulled out an old notebook and pencil, showing the sisters how to draw pictures. At first, they hesitated, unsure what to do. But soon they were drawing animals, trees, and their journey in the snow. John joined them, sketching his cattle and the hills of his ranch. The room was filled with quiet concentration and soft laughter. In that moment, the cabin felt alive in a way it had not in years. It was not just a place to survive. It was a place to feel safe, to explore, and to grow. As the fire burned low, John realized that these two sisters were not only resilient, but also intelligent and thoughtful. The older sister often stopped and thought before making a mark with her pencil, showing careful planning and observation. The younger sister was quicker and more spontaneous, but her imagination was clear in the small drawings she created. John admired their differences, noticing how well they complemented each other, one careful and steady, the other bold and lively. It reminded him that even in hardship, there was beauty and potential. Throughout the day, John also noticed their small gestures of gratitude. The older sister, though quiet, often glanced at him with a soft, appreciative look, while the younger sister found ways to make him smile, bringing him small twigs for the fire, mimicking his actions in a playful way, or laughing at his attempts to speak a few words in there. Language. Each gesture, though simple, deepened the bond between them. John understood that trust was being built slowly, and that trust would be the foundation of whatever came next in their lives together. Night fell, and John prepared another warm sleeping area near the fire. He laid out blankets, ensuring both sisters were comfortable and cozy. They settled in, snuggling together for warmth, their faces relaxed in sleep for the first time in weeks. John sat in his chair, watching them. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and something new, an unexpected sense of responsibility and care that went beyond mere duty. He realized that he had become more than a rescuer. He had become a protector, someone who mattered in their lives and someone whose life was being touched in return. As he stared into the fire, John reflected on the day. He had gone out to tend to his routine tasks, never expecting to find two lost lives in the snow. But fate had intervened, and now his life was intertwined with theirs. He understood that the journey ahead would not be easy. The winter was still harsh, and there were challenges to face. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose beyond the work of the ranch. These girls had brought warmth, laughter, and connection into his solitary existence, and he knew he would do everything he could to keep them safe and happy. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, covering the world in a soft, white blanket. Inside the cabin, there was warmth, security, and a growing sense of hope. John realized that the rescue had not only saved their lives but had also changed his own. Life on the ranch would never be the same. These two sisters had arrived in his life unexpectedly, bringing with them resilience, courage, and the possibility of a new beginning. And as he closed his eyes that night, he whispered softly to the sleeping girls, "Tomorrow will be better. You are safe, and we will face it together." Winter still ruled the northern plains, but the rhythm of life on John Miller's ranch had begun to change. The snow continued to cover the ground in a thick, soft blanket, and the wind howled across the open fields as it had for weeks. Yet inside the cabin, life was slowly taking on a new shape, one filled with the small routines, quiet laughter, and shared effort that had become the glue binding John and the two sisters together. The girls were no longer simply his wards. They were companions, and their presence brought warmth, energy, and a sense of purpose to the once solitary rancher's days. The mornings had become a flurry of activity. John would rise with the first light, fire crackling in the stove, the girls already awake and stretching from the night's sleep. Breakfast was now a shared ritual. The older sister had become adept at helping him prepare the food, carefully measuring, stirring, and tending the fire to keep it steady. The younger sister was full of energy, running from one task to another, laughing at small mistakes and testing her new skills with childish enthusiasm. John watched them closely, feeling a quiet pride in how quickly they adapted to their new life. Their resilience never ceased to amaze him. After breakfast, John would bundle up and lead them outside to help with the ranch chores. The cold was biting, but the girls had grown accustomed to it, their clothing layers protecting them from the worst of the winter chill. The older sister moved carefully, her hands steady as she helped mend fences, feed the cattle, and check for broken posts in the snow-covered fields. The younger sister, though less careful, approached every task with curiosity and determination. She would laugh when a cow nuzzled her unexpectedly or when snow fell from a branch onto her head. John found himself laughing along with her, grateful for the small joys she brought into the harsh winter days. Though the work was difficult, it also provided lessons. John taught them how to observe the cattle, notice signs of illness, and predict the weather based on clouds and wind. The older sister absorbed every lesson with intense focus, asking questions through gestures and nods, while the younger one remembered the practical, exciting parts, often imitating John's movements and making him laugh. The days were long and filled with effort, but John noticed a transformation in both sisters. They were growing stronger, more confident, and more capable of handling the realities of ranch life. As the girls adjusted to their physical surroundings, the emotional bonds between them and John deepened. The older sister often sat quietly beside him during breaks, watching the landscape and observing his careful attention to the animals. Her eyes held a mixture of admiration and gratitude, subtle signals that John, though cautious, was beginning to understand. The younger sister, on the other hand, was playful and full of life. She would run through the snow, bringing small gifts to John, a pinecone, a piece of firewood, or a feather she found along the path, and giggle when he pretended to be surprised. John noticed that these gestures were not just acts of innocence, they were her way of showing affection and appreciation. The evenings were quieter, offering time for reflection, storytelling, and bonding. John would sit by the fire, and the sisters would gather around him, listening as he told stories of his youth, the ranch, and his experiences with the animals. At first, their understanding was limited, but over time, they learned the rhythm of his words, the tone of his voice, and the gestures that accompanied each story. They responded with laughter, questions through gestures, and occasional sketches to illustrate their thoughts. These moments, small yet powerful, created a deep sense of connection that transcended language. Despite the growing closeness, challenges emerged. Life on the ranch was harsh, and winter did not forgive mistakes. There were days when snowstorms made feeding the cattle difficult, when icy winds made the girls shiver despite their layers, and when equipment broke and needed urgent repair. John found himself worried, not only for the animals but for the sisters, whose safety was his responsibility. One evening, during a sudden blizzard, he realized how vulnerable they were. He quickly gathered the girls into the cabin, stoking the fire higher and wrapping them in extra blankets. Their wide eyes looked at him with trust and reliance, and he felt a surge of protective instinct. In that moment, he understood that his life was no longer just his own. The sisters faced their own internal challenges. The older sister struggled with memories of their journey, moments of fear and uncertainty about the future. Some nights she would lie awake, staring at the fire, lost in thought. John would sit quietly nearby, offering silent reassurance, understanding that trust and security were built gradually. The younger sister, more expressive but also sensitive, sometimes became anxious when the wind howled or when unfamiliar noises came from outside. John comforted her with gentle words, a hand on her shoulder, and a calm presence that reassured her she was safe. Slowly, their fear gave way to confidence in him and the safety of their new environment. Over time, daily life revealed more about the sisters, personalities, and their individual strengths. The older sister was calm, thoughtful, and careful, often noticing things others would miss: a broken fence post, a cow straying too far, or changes in the weather. She had a quiet wisdom beyond her years, and John often relied on her insight when making decisions about the ranch. The younger sister, in contrast, was energetic, quick, and playful. She had a natural curiosity that made her explore everything, ask questions through gestures and actions, and find joy even in the harshest conditions. John realized that the combination of their qualities, careful observation and boundless energy, made them a remarkable pair, each complementing the other. As their bond deepened, John began to notice his own feelings shifting. He admired the older sister's quiet strength, her thoughtfulness, and the way she carried herself with dignity despite the hardships she had faced. At the same time, he felt drawn to the younger sister's lively spirit, her ability to find joy in small moments, and the warmth she brought to the cabin. These feelings surprised him. He had lived alone for so long, focused entirely on the ranch, that he had never considered companionship beyond friendship. Yet now, he felt a connection to both sisters, an emotional pull that he could not ignore. For the sisters, the bond was also growing stronger. They had begun to see John not just as a rescuer, but as a guardian, a teacher, and a friend. They admired his skills, his patience, and the quiet kindness he showed them each day. At the same time, they felt something more subtle, an attraction and affection that went beyond gratitude. The older sister appreciated his steady presence and reliability, while the younger sister admired his gentleness and humor. Though neither spoke of it openly, their feelings were slowly emerging, complicated but undeniable. John, ever observant, began to notice the small gestures that revealed their feelings. The older sister would linger near him while helping with chores, offering a careful smile or a glance that lingered longer than necessary. The younger sister would tease him playfully, seeking his attention and delighting in his reactions. Each action was small, subtle, yet meaningful. John found himself thinking about them even when he was alone, wondering how he could provide not just safety but happiness and belonging for both sisters. The harshness of winter continued, but it was softened by the growing warmth inside the cabin. Nights were spent by the fire, sharing meals, telling stories, drawing pictures, and sometimes simply sitting in quiet companionship. The girls learned more about the ranch, the animals, and John's way of life, while John learned more about their past, their personalities, and their resilience. Each day strengthened their bond, each shared experience building trust, understanding, and mutual respect. By the end of the season's harshest weeks, John realized that these sisters had become an inseparable part of his life. The ranch, once a solitary existence, now thrummed with activity, laughter, and shared responsibility. The girls had grown stronger, more confident, and deeply connected to both the land and John. And John, for his part, felt emotions he had long suppressed: affection, admiration, and the stirring of love. Their lives were intertwined in ways none of them had anticipated, yet each moment confirmed that they were meant to face the challenges together. And as another snowstorm approached, with icy winds rattling the windows and snow piling high outside, John sat by the fire and watched the sisters playfully argue over who would gather the firewood next. A quiet smile crossed his face. Life was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, care, and the subtle, growing warmth of family. He understood that challenges lay ahead, both in the harsh world outside and in the complicated web of human emotions inside the cabin. But he also knew that together, they could face anything. The storm outside could rage as it pleased, but inside there was warmth, laughter, and a bond that would endure. Spring was slowly creeping over the northern plains, melting the thick snow into sparkling streams and revealing the hidden greens of the long-frozen land. The days were longer, the sun warmer, and the world outside the cabin seemed to wake from its harsh winter sleep. Yet inside John Miller's cabin, a quiet tension had begun to grow, one born not of danger or fear, but of emotion. The two sisters had adjusted to ranch life, learned its routines, and grown stronger. But now, their feelings toward John had deepened in ways that surprised them both. The older sister was thoughtful and cautious, as always, but John noticed a subtle change. She would linger near him during chores, offering careful smiles and small gestures of care. She watched him closely, learning from his movements, but also finding moments to be near him without words. When he handed her a tool or offered guidance, her eyes would meet his for a heartbeat longer than usual, a silent expression of gratitude and something more tender. John, though aware of the signs, tried to remain focused on the work at hand. He had never been one to read too much into subtle gestures, yet he could not ignore the warmth that filled him when she looked at him that way. The younger sister, in contrast, was more open with her affection, though still playful and lighthearted. She would tease John gently, laugh at his reactions, and find ways to be near him at every opportunity. Sometimes she would bring him small gifts, a smooth stone, a feather, or a bundle of herbs from the land, and place them carefully by his hand, her eyes shining with mischief and care. Her energy was boundless and her joy infectious. John often found himself smiling at her antics, feeling a connection that went beyond mere friendship or responsibility. She had a way of breaking through his calm, solitary exterior and reaching a part of him he had long kept hidden. As the days passed, John began to feel conflicted. He cared for both sisters deeply in different ways. The older sister's quiet strength, intelligence, and careful nature drew him in with a sense of admiration and respect. The younger sister's energy, laughter, and adventurous spirit brought warmth and joy that he had not realized he had been missing. He had lived many years in solitude, his life ruled by routine and work. Yet now he found himself emotionally invested in both of them. The thought of choosing one over the other was daunting, almost unbearable. Each had touched his life in unique ways, and he did not want to hurt either of them. The sisters, too, were aware of the growing complexity. They had lived through hardship together, relying on each other for support and survival. Now, in the safety of the cabin and under John's protection, their feelings were shifting. The older sister admired him for his steadiness and quiet strength, recognizing the reliability and protection he offered. She felt drawn to him, imagining a life where she could always be near him, helping and supporting him in turn. The younger sister, while playful, also began to understand the depth of her affection. She loved his gentle humor, the kindness in his voice, and the way he made her feel safe and valued. The realization was both thrilling and frightening. Neither sister wanted to lose the bond they shared, nor did they want to disrupt the delicate balance that had formed. Tension grew quietly over the following weeks. John tried to maintain normal routines, feeding the animals, mending fences, preparing meals, but small moments were filled with emotional complexity. The older sister would brush against him while carrying wood or linger by the fire, offering quiet smiles. The younger sister would place herself between him and the fireplace, laughing and teasing to catch his attention. Each moment, innocent on the surface, carried unspoken feelings that John felt but could not fully name. He realized that the cabin, once a place of simple survival, had become a stage for emotions he had never experienced so strongly. One afternoon, a small disagreement between the sisters brought the tension to the surface. They were both helping feed the cattle when the younger sister playfully accused the older of taking the best hay. The older sister responded with a sharp, quiet retort. John watched the exchange with mild amusement at first, but he soon realized that beneath the playfulness and minor argument, there was an unspoken competition for his attention. The realization made him pause. He loved them both, but he could feel that their affections were beginning to assert themselves in ways that could no longer be ignored. That evening, John decided to address the growing tension carefully. He sat by the fire, both sisters nearby, and spoke softly. "I care about both of you," he began, choosing his words slowly. "You are brave, kind, and strong. I do not know what to do sometimes." The older sister looked down, her hands folded carefully in her lap, while the younger one's eyes widened, filled with curiosity and worry. Neither spoke, but they understood. The feelings were mutual, unspoken, yet deeply felt. John realized that honesty, even in small words, was necessary to maintain the trust they had built. Over the next days, the sisters' actions became more subtle but intentional. The older sister would offer to help with chores that required careful attention, making sure John had moments to rest. She would bring him water, repair blankets, and quietly tend to tasks with thoughtfulness. The younger sister, meanwhile, would ensure he was never alone for long, staying close while he worked, laughing and making small jokes to brighten his day. Each sister, in her own way, tried to express her feelings without creating conflict between them. John noticed these gestures and felt a mixture of pride, love, and concern for how to navigate the delicate situation. At night, the cabin seemed quieter, yet charged with the emotions of the day. John would sit by the fire, the sisters on either side, their presence comforting yet complicated. They would drift into conversation, sketches, or quiet laughter, but beneath it all lay unspoken desires and growing affection. John realized that the bond between them was evolving, no longer simply protector and protected, but a complex weave of care, admiration, and longing. He understood that these feelings, while confusing, were natural and sincere. One afternoon, while tending to the garden that was beginning to bloom with early spring shoots, the older sister paused beside John, her hands dirty from soil but her expression thoughtful. She handed him a small bundle of herbs, her eyes meeting his with an intensity he could not ignore. "For you," she said softly, her voice careful but meaningful. At the same moment, the younger sister ran up, laughing, holding a small feather she had found. She pressed it into his hand with a mischievous grin. John looked at them, realizing the depth of their feelings, and felt a surge of warmth in his heart. He understood that their desire to remain with him was not just for safety. It was rooted in love, trust, and admiration. The days that followed were filled with small, meaningful moments. The sisters worked together, laughed together, and quietly competed for his attention, each in her own way. John tried to balance his care, showing affection and attention without favoring one over the other. He realized that this was not a matter of simple choice, but of understanding, respect, and the careful navigation of human emotion. The bond they shared was strong enough to survive, but fragile enough that care was needed to protect it. As spring fully arrived, the land outside the cabin bloomed with color, life, and possibility. Inside, the cabin was filled with warmth, laughter, and a complicated but beautiful emotional connection. John realized that he had become deeply involved in both sisters' lives, and they in his. The older sister admired him for his wisdom, strength, and reliability, while the younger sister adored him for his kindness, humor, and gentle spirit. Both were drawn to him, and both wanted to remain in his life, not out of obligation, but from genuine affection. John understood that a decision would eventually need to be made. The thought of choosing one sister over the other weighed heavily on him. He cared for them both in different ways, and the idea of causing either pain was unbearable. Yet he also recognized that honesty, patience, and careful thought were necessary. Their feelings were real, their bonds unbreakable, and their lives had been intertwined in ways that could not be undone. One quiet evening, as the sun set and painted the cabin in shades of gold, John watched the sisters playfully argue over who would set the firewood for the night. He smiled softly, realizing that these moments, filled with joy, tension, and affection, were the very essence of life. Their presence had transformed his once solitary existence into something vibrant, meaningful, and full of emotion. And he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, emotional, practical, or otherwise, they would face them together, bound by trust, respect, and love. The bond between John and the sisters had grown stronger, yet more complex. They had been rescued from the snow, had survived the harsh winter, and had adapted to life on the ranch. Now they faced a new challenge, not survival, but the navigation of human emotion, affection, and desire. Each day brought small gestures, quiet expressions, and moments that deepened their connection. John understood that life would never be the same, but he welcomed the change, knowing that together they could build a future filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Spring had fully arrived on the northern plains, and the harsh winter snow had melted into sparkling streams that meandered through the rolling fields. The ranch, which had seemed so quiet and lonely before, was now alive with activity, warmth, and laughter. John Miller had grown accustomed to the presence of the two sisters, but even he could not have imagined just how deeply they had become part of his life. The bonds formed over the harsh winter, built through trust, care, and shared hardship, had grown into something far stronger and more meaningful than any of them had expected. The sisters had adapted fully to ranch life, each contributing in her own unique way. The older sister had become steady, dependable, and wise beyond her years. She took on responsibilities with a sense of quiet diligence, ensuring that every task was done carefully and thoroughly. The younger sister was energetic and playful, her laughter echoing across the fields as she explored, learned, and helped John in her own spirited way. Together, they complemented each other perfectly, their personalities balancing the work, the hardships, and the joy of life on the ranch. For John, the days were filled with a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. The solitude that had once been comforting now seemed empty without their presence. Their companionship brought a warmth that extended far beyond the fire in the cabin. He cared deeply for both sisters, in ways that were complex, sincere, and enduring. The older sister's calm, thoughtful nature drew him in with admiration and respect, while the younger sister's lively spirit and laughter reminded him of the simple joys of life. Each had touched his heart in a different but equally profound way. Yet the question that had weighed heavily on him through the previous weeks had not been answered. How could he balance his affection for both sisters without causing pain? He had tried to remain fair, attentive, and patient, understanding that honesty and respect were key. At the same time, he realized that avoidance would not solve anything. The sisters' feelings for him were clear, and the bonds they had formed were unbreakable. He needed to find a solution that honored their trust and their love, a way to create a life together that was harmonious and joyful. One evening, as the sun set and painted the cabin in soft shades of gold, John gathered the sisters near the fire. They sat quietly, their eyes reflecting curiosity and anticipation. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing each word. "I care for both of you," he said, his voice calm but full of sincerity. "You are brave, kind, and strong. I do not want anyone to be hurt. I want all of us to be happy together." The older sister's eyes softened, and the younger sister's lips curved into a small, hopeful smile. They understood, without words, that John's intention was genuine and that he wished to find a way to make them all part of one family. Over the following days, John, with the sisters' input, began to create a new routine that would allow them to live together harmoniously. Each sister had her own space within the cabin, a small area of her own for rest and privacy, while shared spaces became areas of cooperation, laughter, and conversation. Chores were divided fairly, respecting each sister's strengths and preferences. They learned to communicate openly, sharing thoughts, feelings, and concerns with one another. Through these discussions, it became clear that their mutual respect and affection could form the foundation of a life together built on trust, care, and love. The older sister often helped John with long-term planning for the ranch. She observed the animals, the land, and the weather, offering insights that proved invaluable. Her careful thinking, patience, and attention to detail made the ranch more efficient and safe. John admired her ability to foresee potential problems and her calm approach to challenges. The younger sister, meanwhile, brought energy, creativity, and joy. She explored new ways to improve life on the ranch, tended small projects, and made every day lighter with her laughter and playfulness. Together, they created a dynamic balance, making life on the ranch fuller, happier, and more meaningful. Outside, the land was alive with growth and promise. The streams sparkled, the fields turned green, and the first flowers of spring peeked through the thawed soil. The ranch had survived the harsh winter, and with the sisters' help, it began to thrive. John found satisfaction not only in the work, but in the shared achievements and the small moments of joy. Seeing the sisters laugh while feeding the animals, watching them cooperate on chores, or enjoying a quiet meal together by the fire. Every day reinforced the strength of their bond and the depth of their mutual care. Emotionally, life became richer. The sisters' affection for John was evident in countless small gestures, helping him with tasks, offering thoughtful gifts, sharing laughter, and showing concern for his well-being. John, in turn, demonstrated his love through patience, guidance, protection, and quiet acts of kindness. He learned to listen to both of them, to honor their individuality, and to celebrate the ways in which they complemented each other. In this harmony, the potential for conflict diminished, replaced by mutual understanding and shared purpose. As weeks turned into months, the bond between John and the sisters grew stronger. The winter that had once threatened to break them had instead united them. They shared stories, celebrated small victories, and comforted each other in moments of hardship. The older sister became a steady presence, offering wisdom and reassurance. The younger sister brought joy, laughter, and a sense of adventure. John felt his heart expand in ways he had never imagined, filled with love for both of them, a love rooted in respect, gratitude, and shared experience. One evening, after a long day tending to the cattle and repairing fences, they all sat by the fire, tired but content. The older sister rested her head on John's shoulder, a quiet gesture of trust and affection. The younger sister leaned against his other side, her small hand resting on his arm. In that moment, the cabin was filled with warmth, not just from the fire but from the bond that had grown between them. John realized that the solution he had sought, harmony, love, and family, was not a choice between them, but a commitment to care for both, to nurture the relationship and ensure that everyone felt valued, safe, and loved. The days that followed were filled with new routines and small celebrations. They planted a small garden together, watched the calves grow, repaired fences, and explored the surrounding land. Each shared activity strengthened their connection and created memories that would last a lifetime. The sisters continued to care for one another, supporting each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. John observed this dynamic with pride and affection, understanding that the family they had created was built on mutual respect, love, and shared experience rather than obligation or fear. As spring turned into summer, the ranch flourished, and so did their lives together. The sisters were no longer simply visitors in John's home. They were family in every sense. Their love for him and for each other created a stable, nurturing environment where laughter, care, and mutual respect defined every day. John realized that the hardships of the past, the cold winter, the snow, and the fear, had led them to this place, a life richer and fuller than any he had known before. And so life continued on the ranch, filled with love, laughter, and shared purpose. John, once a solitary rancher, now had two companions who had survived hardship and chosen to remain with him, bound by trust, affection, and loyalty. The sisters, who had faced danger and fear, found safety, warmth, and belonging in the cabin and in John's care. Together, they faced the challenges of ranch life, the changing seasons, and the unpredictability of the world outside, strengthened by their shared bond and the love they had nurtured. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the distant hills, they would sit by the fire, the older sister reading from John's old books, the younger sister drawing small sketches, and John reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. The hardships they had faced were not forgotten, but they had been transformed into a foundation for a new life, a life filled with hope, care, and enduring connection. Every moment of laughter, every gesture of kindness, and every shared task reinforced the bond that now defined their lives. John understood, finally, that life had given him more than he could have imagined. He had been alone for so long, content with simplicity and routine, yet the arrival of these two sisters had transformed his existence. They had brought love, laughter, purpose, and companionship into his life, and in turn, he had provided them with safety, care, and a home. Together, they had created a family, not defined by convention or obligation, but by choice, trust, and mutual affection. And as the night fell, with the wind softly whispering outside and the stars shining above the plains, John looked at the sisters sleeping peacefully near the fire. He felt a deep, abiding gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. He whispered softly, "We are together now. We will face life as one. We are home." It was a promise, a reflection, and a celebration of the extraordinary bond that had grown from hardship, resilience, and love. In that moment, the cabin was filled not just with warmth from the fire, but with hope, joy, and the certainty that their shared life had only just begun.